Hello and welcome. In this lecture, I want to talk about the preprocessor. We briefly discussed this concept in earlier lectures, mainly just citing it as an advantage. The main reason I want to talk about it a little right now, early in class, is because it's being used in every single program. And I want to talk about the include directive, which is a preprocessor command. So if I want to talk about that, I first have to describe the preprocessor in general. This is going to be a high-level description. As we go through class, we'll talk about more of the preprocessor in terms of its different directives and so on. But to just understand the basics, this preprocessor is a unique feature of C. It's not found in many other languages. And it's very advantageous, and you should try to understand it, and we should try to use it as much as possible. It basically allows for programs to be easier to develop by the developer. It makes programs easier to read. It makes them easier to modify, and it makes them easier to port. So it allows for a lot of advantages. And so to have a description, understand what it is in an early learning of C is important. It's part of the C compilation process, but it's recognized as special statements. And just like it says preprocessor in the name, it implies that something's going on before you process the code. So it analyzes certain statements in your code before it actually analyzes the program itself. It does things before it compiles, essentially. So it's telling your compiler that, hey, before you actually convert any of this code, before you generate the object files, before you generate and do all the linking and generate the executable, first do this. Okay, and so because you do this stuff before you compile, you can optimize things and you can make things a lot easier. Now, you'll often have these preprocessor commands at the very top of your source code, but they can be anywhere. They can be anywhere interspersed throughout your code. One of the big ones that we're going to talk about is the include. So the way that you can identify preprocessor statements in your source code is they have a pound sign before them. So they have that number pound sign. And that has to be the first non-space character on the line in order to be a preprocessor command, also known as a preprocessor directive. Now, as I mentioned, our first challenge actually used a preprocessor directive. It was the include directive. We know it's a preprocessor directive because we saw the pound symbol. We don't exactly know what the include does. We'll talk about that in another lecture, but it is a preprocessor command. It is a preprocessor directive. And again, because it's used so widely, basically in every program, because every program is going to have an include, I wanted to talk about it early on. But it doesn't just mean that there's an include. The preprocessor can do many, many other things and have other commands. Some of the things we'll talk about as we go through this course concerning the preprocessor are things like being able to create constants. Constants is a concept where it's a variable essentially that never changes its value. It's data that never changes. That's how you can think about it, because we haven't even talked about variables yet. But you can create constants in the preprocessor, and this optimizes your code, makes it more efficient and runs faster. There's also this concept of a macro, which is an entire another topic in and of itself, but a macro is another preprocessor directive. And the way that you can create the macros is you can use the define statement. And so we'll talk about the define, we'll talk about creating constants, but you should be familiar with this preprocessor concept and utilizing these different things like include, define, constant. Include, we'll talk about specifically in the next lecture, but a benefit of this is that you can create your own library files. And we talked about what a library is, right? A library is just reusing existing code. So it's code that you don't have to write. The C programming languages comes with its own standard library that does many things for you, like display output to the console, read and write files, handle streams, all sorts of different things. Again, similar, if you're familiar with Java, similar to importing Java APIs, application programming interfaces. Other examples of a preprocessor directive would be conditional things like the if-def, the end-if, the else, or the if not defined statements. And we'll talk about those in more detail as well. But all of these preprocessor directives help with the efficiency of the code. And they run before the compiler actually runs. It's run before any code is generated, any object files or executable files. But we'll cover all this in much more details in future lectures. I wanted to give you a little taste of it beforehand because we need to understand it before we can understand what we're doing with the include statement, which is what we're going to talk about next. Thank you.